Not everyone who pulls away has stopped caring, and not everyone who stays close is truly there. Sometimes the person creating the most distance is the one feeling something so deep that they do not know how to carry it yet. That is the twist most people never see. We are trained to think love always moves forward, always comes closer, always speaks clearly, but for some people, love first shows up as hesitation, as silence, as a strange step back right after a real moment of connection. And if you read that too quickly, you may mistake growing attachment for rejection. Stay with this, because what you are about to hear changes the way emotional distance looks. It changes the meaning of a delayed reply, a quiet return, a person who leaves, then comes back softer than before. Most people miss the sign because they are waiting for loud proof, big words, open confessions, constant reassurance. But some of the deepest feelings do not arrive with noise, they arrive with resistance, slowly turning into return. So think about someone from your own life while you listen. Someone confusing, someone hard to read, someone who seemed close, then far, then near again. You may realize the pattern was never as simple as you thought. And if you have ever loved someone like this, do not skip ahead, because the next part may explain a silence that once hurt you more than you admitted. People with avoidant patterns usually do not show affection in direct, warm, obvious ways. Their inner system is built to manage emotional intensity by creating space when closeness starts to feel too strong. So when love begins to grow inside them, it often does not look tender at first. It looks mixed, it looks contradictory. They still pull away, but the distance is no longer complete. They still go quiet, but the silence is not as final as before. That is where the difference begins. The real sign is not that they never leave. The real sign is what happens after they do. Do they come back? Do they re-enter the conversation without throwing away the connection? Do they return with some thread still alive between you? That matters more than most people understand. Their first instinct is still self-protection. Closeness can feel like pressure. Vulnerability can feel like losing control. So taking space becomes their natural way to calm down. But when someone begins to matter deeply, they start doing something new. They tolerate discomfort a little longer. They do not run quite as fast. They may answer after silence without acting like the bond was erased. They may re-engage in a topic they once would have avoided. They may not sound emotional, but they are still there. That is not full emotional ease, not yet. It is something quieter and often more meaningful. It is contact surviving fear. And that shift, small as it looks, is where real attachment begins to take shape. When this kind of person starts to care deeply, their usual pattern begins to crack in small but important ways. Before, emotional closeness may have led to a clean disappearance, a full shut-off, a total retreat. But now, traces remain, a message later, a check-in after distance, a practical reply even when emotional words are still hard. It can feel confusing because the behavior is not smooth, it is not simple. One part of them still wants space, while another part refuses to let the connection fully die. That creates the strange middle ground many people do not know how to read. They withdraw, but not all the way. They step back, but they keep watching. They go silent, but they do not erase the emotional thread. And that matters, because once distance becomes temporary instead of terminal, something serious is changing inside them. They are no longer using space only to escape. They are also learning how to stay connected while feeling overwhelmed. That is a major shift. It means attachment is beginning to compete with defense. The old instinct says, run. The new feeling says, not this time, not completely. That internal conflict shows up as inconsistency on the outside, but underneath it, something steady is forming. Watch for the pattern, not the moment. One return can mean anything. Repeated return means far more. If they keep coming back without being forced, without being chased, without being dragged into contact, that usually means the bond is growing under the surface, even while fear is still speaking. One of the clearest signs is not emotional intensity. It is emotional presence during discomfort. Usually when inner tension rises, especially around closeness, they escape. They may change the subject, go cold, delay replies, leave the room, distract themselves, create mental distance. That move is not always about rejecting the other person. Often it is about escaping the pressure they feel inside themselves. But when real attachment forms, something subtle begins to change. They start staying present inside moments that once would have made them vanish. Not perfectly, not gracefully, but longer. That pause is everything. They may remain in a difficult conversation a little more than before. They may not become sweet or expressive, but they also do not disappear at the first sign of vulnerability. The silence becomes shorter, the distance becomes less complete. There is a visible hesitation before withdrawal, and sometimes that hesitation is enough to keep them connected. This is important because it shows emotional tolerance expanding. They are not suddenly healed. They are not suddenly comfortable with intimacy. They are learning to exist in discomfort without instantly breaking the bond. And that is a very different thing. Presence starts replacing disappearance. Not all at once, not in dramatic scenes, in small increments, in moments most people overlook. If you blink, you miss it. That is why many people misread this stage and assume nothing is changing. But something is changing. Endurance is replacing escape. And for someone wired to protect themselves through distance, that is not a small sign. It is one of the biggest signs there is. Another strong sign is consistency, not intensity, not huge declarations, not sudden emotional speeches. Consistency. This is where many people get it wrong. They wait for passion and overlook stability. But for an avoidant person, stable re-engagement is often more meaningful than dramatic closeness. Before, they may have entered and exited your life without warning. A strong moment, then silence. A deep talk, then distance. But when feelings deepen, that pattern starts becoming more regular. They reply more often. They return without making you restart everything from the beginning. They stay linked to your life in a quiet but ongoing way. The tone may still be low-key, the words may still be simple, but the rhythm changes, and rhythm tells the truth. Their fear system is built around interrupting closeness when it gets too intense. So if continuity begins appearing where interruption used to rule, that means their inner structure is changing. The fear is still there, yes, but it is no longer deciding every move. Small acts suddenly mean a lot. A message without being asked, a return after taking space, a follow-up that shows they remembered, re-engaging without pretending nothing existed before. These are not flashy gestures, but they are powerful ones. Earlier, connection had to be controlled through separation. Now, connection begins surviving separation. That is the shift. The bond does not reset every time distance happens. It stays alive underneath the pause, and over time, that creates a form of attachment that looks quieter than romance movies, but often runs deeper than people realize. Keep listening, because this next part explains why their most confusing behavior may actually reveal what they cannot yet say. Sometimes they test the relationship without ever admitting that they are doing it. Not in a cruel or manipulative way, more like an unconscious experiment. When someone becomes important to them, they may create moments of distance and then quietly watch what happens. They become less responsive, more neutral, a little withdrawn, and from the outside it feels like they are drifting. But inside, they may be measuring something very important. Can this connection survive space? Will closeness turn into pressure? Will this person panic, chase, explode, or collapse if I step back? These are not questions they usually ask aloud. Vulnerability feels too risky for that. So instead, they gather emotional information through observation. If the other person reacts with panic, emotional flooding, or relentless pursuit, it often confirms their oldest fear that closeness is unstable and consuming. But if the other person stays grounded, calm, and steady, something new happens inside them. They begin to sense that connection might not destroy their peace after all, that it can stretch without snapping. This is why their behavior can feel so mixed. They may seem distant, then suddenly reappear and reconnect. The withdrawal was not always final. Sometimes it was a test of durability, a way of checking whether the bond could handle tension. And when the answer is yes, they often soften in ways that are easy to miss, unless you know what to look for. The need to test starts reducing. The nervous system begins predicting safety instead of danger. Space stops acting like a weapon or an escape hatch and starts becoming what it should have been all along, a temporary state, not a permanent break. Most people never realize this while it is happening. As attachment gets deeper, one of the biggest inner changes is the growth of emotional tolerance. Earlier on, vulnerability can feel overwhelming. That is why distance becomes automatic. It is fast, protective, almost reflexive. Something feels too close, and the system says, step away now. But when love begins to matter more, the urge to leave is still there, yet it stops having total control. This is where the real transformation begins. They may still feel the pressure, they may still want to pull back. But now there is a delay between the feeling and the action, and that delay is psychologically huge. It means there is now a choice where there used to be only instinct. Instead of fully shutting down, they stay partly connected. Instead of disappearing, they reduce the distance. Instead of severing the bond, they hold it at arm's length while trying to stay regulated. This is not perfect closeness. It is controlled exposure. They remain present while carefully managing how much they show, how long they stay, how much emotional intensity they can handle at once. But little by little, capacity grows. They stay in hard conversations longer. They remain present in moments that used to trigger immediate retreat. They return after distance without needing total emotional reconstruction. These are small behavioral expansions, but underneath them is a deep restructuring. They are learning to resolve discomfort without destroying connection. That is a major shift in relational life. It means the relationship is no longer interrupted every single time fear rises. Fear still exists, caution still exists, the need for space still exists. But now closeness and discomfort begin to coexist instead of automatically leading to separation. That is the point where attachment starts becoming more stable and more real. Love for this kind of person often begins as a quiet change in how space and connection are balanced. They still need autonomy, they still guard their inner world, they still value control because control feels safe. But when someone truly matters, that control softens around the edges. Not through dramatic surrender, through careful proximity. They do not rush toward closeness. In fact, they may move slowly enough to confuse you, but they also stop resetting the relationship every time emotions rise. That is the part people miss. Space changes its meaning. Before, space meant break, reset, disconnect. Now space begins to mean pause, regulate, return. That difference is everything. The bond remains acknowledged even during distance. Messages are not fully abandoned. Contact resumes without acting like the whole relationship vanished. Separation no longer equals emotional deletion. Inside them, two systems are negotiating. One wants safety through distance. The other is starting to value closeness more than escape. Neither one fully wins at first, so their behavior still looks mixed, still hesitant, still uneven. But underneath that hesitation is a real thread of continuity. And continuity is one of the most honest signs of growing attachment. They may never become the loudest person in love. They may never flood you with emotional language. But if they keep the thread alive, if they keep returning to the bond, if the connection survives their cycles of retreat, that often means you matter more than their words are able to say. Stay with this, because the next shift may be the one that changes everything, when returning no longer feels like starting over, but like continuing something that never fully disappeared. That is one of the deepest signs of real emotional investment. In earlier stages, when they withdrew, it often felt like a full reset. Silence broke the thread. Reconnection required starting from zero. The warmth was gone. The bond felt interrupted. But when attachment becomes stronger, that reset mechanism begins to weaken. Something new appears instead, continuity. They return after distance and the connection is still there, maybe quiet, maybe understated, but still there. They do not act like the bond was erased during the silence. They pick up where something emotional still remains. That matters more than any big confession, because it shows that absence no longer deletes emotional memory. The relationship survives the pause. They come back not only because they are lonely or bored or pressured. They come back because the bond itself is active beneath the fear. That is a major internal shift. Emotional distance is no longer functioning as total protection. Space still calms them, yes, but it no longer dissolves attachment. Over time, this creates a rhythm. Distance, return, re-engagement. And that rhythm begins to feel more natural, less fragmented, less chaotic. To the outside world, it may still look inconsistent, but underneath it is a restructuring of permanence. They are slowly learning that closeness does not need to be continuous every second in order to remain real. Connection can survive absence, and once their system learns that, the need for total retreat starts to reduce. This is not flashy, It is not dramatic, but it is one of the clearest signs that what they feel is no longer casual. It is becoming part of who they are, even if they do not yet have the language to say it clearly. There is also a very important difference between someone who is truly attached and someone who is simply keeping you as an option. This part matters, so listen closely. Genuine attachment still leaves evidence of care. Even in distance, there is a thread. They remember things. They circle back. They show continuity. They do not only return when it benefits them, they return because the bond still lives in them. Someone who is not emotionally invested may disappear and reappear too, but the quality is different. There is no deepening, no growing steadiness, no quiet expansion of tolerance, no real emotional memory in the way they reconnect. With genuine attachment, you begin to feel that the return has weight. It carries something from before. It does not feel random every time. This is why pattern matters more than isolated moments. Do not judge only one silence. Do not judge only one comeback. Watch the sequence. Is fear being challenged over time, even slightly? Is the connection becoming more durable? Is the withdrawal less destructive than it used to be? Are they trying, even in imperfect ways, to stay linked while protecting themselves? Those signs matter. Love here is not measured by how loudly they feel. It is measured by what they keep protecting, even while afraid. And when an avoidant person starts protecting the connection instead of only protecting themselves, that is when things begin changing for real. Slowly, quietly, often painfully, but truly. That is why patience and clarity both matter. You do not excuse harmful behavior, you do not romanticize neglect, but you also do not misread every moment of distance as proof that nothing meaningful exists. Sometimes the story is more layered than that. You will also notice that their affection often comes through action before it ever comes through language. They may not say, "I miss you," but they show up. They may not confess deep emotion, but they remember what matters to you. They may not speak in soft emotional lines, but they start making room for you in their routines, in their thoughts, in their decisions. This is especially important because many people wait for emotional wording and overlook practical devotion. But for someone who struggles with open vulnerability, actions are often the first safe form of honesty. They may send something small that made them think of you. They may ask about a detail from your day that most people would forget. They may keep a promise they could have easily ignored. They may help in concrete ways when life gets heavy, even if their tone stays restrained. None of this looks dramatic, but it is often more real than people think, because it costs them something. It costs attention, it costs emotional exposure, it costs inner effort, and the more they care, the more this pattern begins to build. Slowly, their world starts adjusting around your existence, not in a loud way, in a steady way. That is the kind of love many people miss because it does not perform well on the surface. It does not look cinematic enough. But look closer. The person who once vanished may now pause before leaving. The person who once cut off the thread may now keep it alive in quiet ways. The person who once treated closeness like danger may now be learning, day by day, that connection can exist without swallowing them. That is not small. That is the beginning of trust turning into attachment. Still, this process is rarely clean. There will be setbacks, moments of closeness followed by sudden distance, softness followed by confusion, progress followed by retreat. And that does not always mean the feeling is false. Sometimes it means the feeling is getting real enough to trigger old defenses. The closer they feel, the more their inner alarms may start flashing. This is why love can make them look less certain before it makes them look more secure. That sounds backward, but it happens all the time. Strong attachment can wake up strong fear. The bond matters more, so the risk feels larger. The possibility of losing themselves, being rejected, or feeling emotionally trapped becomes more intense in their mind, so the system pushes back. That pushback can look cold, distant, hard to understand, but inside there may be a real conflict happening. One part wants the relationship. Another part fears what the relationship demands emotionally. This is why you may see them come closer and then freeze, open up slightly and then shut down, reach out and then go quiet. What matters is whether the overall direction keeps moving toward continuity. Are they learning from the cycle? Is the return getting easier? Is the bond surviving more than it used to? If yes, then something meaningful is developing, even if the pace is uneven. And if you have lived this pattern, you know how confusing it can be. That is why you must learn to read depth, not just mood. Read direction, not just moments. Read the arc, not only the scene. Because sometimes the person who looks the most unsure is the one fighting the hardest not to lose something that has started to matter deeply. At a certain point, the relationship begins to stop feeling like a threat to their identity. This may be the most important change of all. Early on, closeness can feel like captivity, like obligation, like pressure, like losing personal space, emotional control, and inner freedom. But when trust grows slowly and consistently, a new understanding begins forming inside them. Connection does not have to erase the self. Love does not have to trap. Intimacy does not always lead to collapse. This realization is not usually sudden. It builds through repeated evidence, through your steadiness, through their repeated return, through moments where vulnerability happens and the world does not end, through silence that does not destroy the bond, through distance that does not become abandonment. Little by little, the nervous system starts learning a new story. And once that happens, their behavior changes in ways that look small outside but feel huge inside. They stop needing so much emotional reset. They do not interpret every strong feeling as danger. They become more able to remain connected when tension rises. They begin to let closeness stay in the room a little longer. That is the ground where love becomes sustainable, not perfect, not effortless, sustainable. And that matters far more than intensity, because intensity can come from chemistry, impulse, loneliness, fantasy, but sustainability comes from inner change. It comes from a person learning that they can stay and still remain themselves. They can care and still breathe. They can be close and still be free. When that lesson starts settling into them, love becomes visible, not as a burst, but as a quiet persistence, a staying power, a willingness to remain emotionally linked even while still learning how to feel safe there. And this is where many people need to hear something honest. Seeing these signs does not mean you should accept endless confusion, mixed signals, or emotional neglect. Love should not become an excuse for pain without accountability. A person may care deeply and still need to grow. A person may feel attached and still behave in ways that hurt. Both can be true. So the goal is not to romanticize distance. The goal is to understand it clearly. If the pattern is real attachment, you will usually see movement. Small movement maybe, slow movement, yes. But movement, more return, more